an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 1, Episode 4, Manhattan Nightclub. In this episode, the crew heads over to the nightclub of one of their old friends, who turns out to be Nick Kroll. They want to team up. He does not. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. Ashley commissioned this at the very last second. I appreciate it. A slot opened up, and she was worried that this might get canceled. The next episode isn't until June. I, at this point, am booked into August. So, yeah, if there isn't another one between, another one booked soon, it might wind up being on the cut list, but it's one of those things that, with the amount of slots that I have available, it can be really hard. Yeah. Ashley says it's hard to commission. I try most days. Yeah, I'm sorry. But Kyle says it's like getting a table at a very fancy restaurant. Oh, I'm like, Nobu. Hold reference, God. So this episode, all right, I'm going to be upfront with y'all. Nick Kroll is a real hit and miss for me. He's one of those where I, at times, find him so funny that I want to die. One of my favorite characters he's ever played was a really competitive German foosball player on Community. And then there are times where I find his shtick really tired. Honestly, I have the same, I have this with like a few different comedians who tend to be consistently cast as like the same sort of wacky character. However, I was really pleased at how much he sort of underplayed this role. Once I saw it was Nick Kroll, I braced myself for a lot of really like over-the-top sort of goofiness. And instead, he feels a lot less cartoonish than I was expecting, and much more like an everyday sort of dickhead. And by everyday, I certainly don't mean like, the average person on the street, but he seems human. He seems like somebody really rich and spoiled who is just used to getting their way all the time, which he certainly is. He's in a position of power, and he has this like retinue behind him of other vampires that is substantial, and obviously makes our little Staten Island group feel a bit underpowered, I would think. So I wound up being won over by him after all. But before we start talking about that, I really want to talk about the new vampire girl. I don't remember her name, you guys, but I really enjoy her, and I'm excited that we get this update. She is the one that is turned in the very first episode by Nadja. And I haven't really mentioned her when I've been recording because she hasn't been a part of things much. But when I'm thinking about the show, she comes up in my mind a lot. And I wonder, I wonder what's happening with that. Are we going to see her again? And I sort of thought maybe we would just see the very beginnings of her transition, and then we wouldn't hear from her at all until she turned up, like maybe at the very end of the season. I am pleased that we're getting more of a look at the transition time, because I was curious about how it works. This is something that varies from one, type of lore to another, is how do you turn into a vampire? And of course, the version that we see in this is the very traditional one where you have to be practically drained of your blood and then fed their blood. And it was a little bit different because it's in a vial. It's not like it's not as if Nadja cut her wrist and had her drink from her actual. So because of that, this girl doesn't realize what has happened to her. If Nadja were to have approached it that way, it would have gone very differently. And, then there's like the Twilight where people have venom. Vampires have venom and you get bitten and you get turned and there's no stopping it. And I don't remember, guys, how does somebody get turned in Buffy? Do they get fed blood? Is that a thing in that one? I don't even remember how that goes. But then, once you get past the very first step of, I was fed blood and now it's happening, you have to then start to figure out, okay, in this lore, how long does that take and how does it finish? Because in, for example, the Dresden Files, you can be half vampire. And what that means is that you have been turned and you have bloodlust, but you haven't fully transitioned into a vampire that cannot walk in daylight, that can't, you are still capable of being like superhumanly fast and you have a lot of the perks, but you're also saddled with this incredible thirst. It's not until you kill somebody to drink their blood that you fully transform. And in Dresden, when you transform, it's not like, oh, now you're a vampire. You look like a human, but you're a vampire. No, you then transform into like a bat-like creature. And you can wear a mask that makes you look human, but you're not at all anymore. You undergo a full body transformation. Now, that's the impression that I'm getting from this, not the full body transformation, although they can turn into bats, but that she has to kill someone in order to transition completely. And it's odd because, when she has this roommate who spends all this time trying to like pronounce the name of the medication that she was given, but her roommate just thinks she's sick, of course, and goes out to get her some medicine and comes back and believes that this girl is dead. I keep wanting to call her Dawn. Is her name Dawn? Did I just pull that out of nowhere? So of course, oh my God, I love it too, guys. She doesn't just dial 911. She asks Siri to dial 911, which, I really can't. That's just such an unnecessary thing. And it really is very funny. This is so it's one of those things that I feel like you can watch this and think, oh my God, that is a good joke. But have y'all ever been around somebody who uses their phone in just a totally different way from you? And you're like, why would you ever do it that way? Because there is nothing like watching a person choose to use speech to text when you don't ever do that. Or choose to use Siri to find something out when you would have just typed it. And it, to you, seems a lot simpler. So for me, I never use Siri. Ever. I don't feel it's effective most of the time. Unless you're asking how many ounces are in a gallon, something that has a definitive answer, I don't feel like it works out super well most of the time. So it wouldn't occur to me to use Siri to dial 911, but I am certain that there are people out there who would do it this way. And so we see this girl on a stretcher being rolled to an ambulance, and they had checked her vitals and pronounced her dead. And this girl is trying to explain to them how this all went down. And all of a sudden, the new vampire, who I will call Dawn until someone corrects me, sits straight up. And I was waiting for her to Jenna, thank you, Ashley. I was waiting for her to get burnt by the sun. Even though when she's laying on her bed, there's a shaft of sunlight coming into her dorm room. So it's not as if If she had been going to burst into flames, she would have done it already, more than likely. And I knew that, but then I was like, well, maybe she's still got some, like, when she's inside a building and it's through a window, because she's so new, she's not as sensitive. And perhaps once she's outside and it hits her directly, then it might become a problem. And it doesn't seem to be. She just gets up off the stretcher and runs inside and seems really freaked out. I am wondering at the, like, nature of her being as freaked out as she is, because there's a variety of reasons for this. First, if you just thought you were sleeping and you wake up and you're on a stretcher being rolled towards an ambulance and you hear people talking about how you're dead, right there, that's a problem. However, if that happened to most of us, we wouldn't run. We would sit up and be like, what happened? Oh my God, why am I here? What's going on? Did you call them 911? Like, I would be asking all kinds of questions, trying to figure out how this all occurred. The fact that she runs makes me think that she knows something is up and maybe she's feeling bloodlust. Maybe that's it. She sits straight up. Her instinct was to fucking bite and kill somebody, and she realized that this is an issue, and so she flees before she can hurt anyone. Regardless, I am very curious to see how this shakes out, because she doesn't have anybody around her explaining how this works. I don't know if Nadja has given her a second thought. That's really what's sort of interesting to me, is the idea of Nadja coming back around and checking in with her and being like, okay, so here's what's going on. And Jenna, I mean, if I were Jenna, I would be really conflicted, because on the one hand, you did this to me without my consent or explaining what happened to me, what was happening. I would be very angry about that. At the same time, you don't know any other vampires who can show you the ropes. So as angry as I would be with Nadja, I wouldn't want to push her away, because there's no going back now. This is what I am. So either I accept her help in showing me the ropes and how this all works, or I figure it out on my own and just sort of flounder. And I feel like that wouldn't be something I would want to do. So it just all depends. Is she, like, she knows where Nadja lives. I'm acting like Nadja's going to come and, like, check up on her, but it doesn't really feel like Nadja has given it any sort of thought. So maybe Jenna goes and tracks her down, and it's just like, what the fuck happened? What did you do to me? And if that is the case, what does happen? You know, this is the sort of thing that I'm really fascinated by, is when you get turned into a vampire in a universe in which vampires are not thought to exist, how do you explain your sudden drastic change in behavior to your family? For me, it wouldn't be a big problem for, like, practically anybody but Owen, because my family doesn't live nearby. And yeah, I would just, like, I would have to tell him probably what was going on with me. I don't think I could get away with hiding it from him. That said, I wouldn't be able to, like, see his family or go to events ever again that were held during the day. Cooking and eating has always been a major part of my personality, so that would dramatically shift. It would be really hard to hide. So what does she do? Does she just cut off ties with everybody? Like, will they make her a character who conveniently has no family to worry about? Or will they make her somebody who has people who are checking up on her, wondering how she's doing? I think there's a lot more potential for comedy in the second. You need conflict. You need awkward questions and situations where there are people who don't feel like they're part of this world suddenly showing up and being thrust into the midst of this. And what choice do you make? Do you have it be that we have a lot of, like, hilarious sort of misunderstandings because they don't know that she's a vampire and she's trying to hide it? Or do they go a different way and have her, like, tell the truth and them having, like, they have to adjust to who she is now? There's a lot you could do with this, and it's not something that gets handled a lot in the media that I have covered, because it's often we have the sort of thing like where it's a person who is human getting involved with a vampire who's been alive for hundreds of years. And so everybody that they know is everybody who would have known them when they were human is dead already. And everybody who is human that they are friends with now, they have created a convincing enough cover story by this point that their strange behavior is explained. The one exception, obviously, being when Bella turns into a vampire in Twilight. And even that, I don't feel is actually handled in the book at all. There's no real explanation given for how she gets her family to, like, just believe that she's okay. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I am excited about this. I hope that it turns into more of a thing. I think the actress who plays Jenna is very engaging, and she's just really likable, and she's such a different, like, because normally when we have people being turned into vampires, and this is part of the joke of the series, right, is they're going to be super sexy. They are a sexy human who has been turned into an even sexier vampire, or they were an okay-looking human, and transforming them into a vampire made them sexier because that's like part of the magic of being a vampire, is that you are very attractive to draw in your prey. Then you have people like there's an episode of True Blood where there's a vampire who is not particularly attractive, just an ordinary dude. And that makes him feel kind of alone because most vampires are super hot, and they were turned because of the fact that they are super hot and somebody wanted to keep them. So we've got in this show, Nandor's hot. Set him aside. Nadja's hot. Set her aside. Lazlo, not unattractive. Actually, he has an appeal for me, but certainly not traditionally hot, and such a goof. And Jenna wouldn't be seen as traditionally hot either. Now, she's very attractive, but y'all know what I'm saying. She is overweight. I don't even like that term because it always implies that there's like a weight you should be. She is above the weight that usually is seen in show business. And they have her looking real raggedy. They put her in makeup that like makes her look really sick and gross. They are not trying to glamorize this transformation at all. And she's also just kind of awkward and shy rather than being somebody who is extremely magnetic or extroverted in a way that feels like what you would expect from a vampire who's trying to go out there and seduce people. You look at her and you're like, how is she going to get somebody alone to bite and eat them? What tactic is she going to use? Because it feels like she would be really bad at this. So yeah, because she's such a non-traditional choice, I'm just very excited to see where she's going. So anyway, long time talking about it, but it's because you guys know how much I love logistics. I really love finding out what the lore is in any given like universe. And I am very invested in this girl feeling like somebody like me. If I were to be bitten, what would I do? How would this work? I've joked about it with Rashawn that if I knew that I was going to be turned into a vampire, I would definitely work to lose weight because I'm going to be frozen in the appearance that I have once I'm turned forever. And I would not want to be frozen looking like I do now. And that's my baggage, but there it is. And the idea of this girl being a really successful, badass vampire, despite the fact that she doesn't seem like she would be on the outset, maybe she will, or maybe she won't. Maybe she'll be incredibly awkward and strange. I have no idea. She also, as a vampire, will have like mind control powers. So how will she utilize those? What'll that look like? We haven't circled back either to the guy that Nadja thought was the reincarnation of her old lover, and I'm curious if he's ever going to turn up again, but I do find that really amusing. So anyway, I'm very excited about Jenna. I'm looking forward to seeing her again. I really hope that, you know, coming up, we get more of her and that maybe she becomes more of a part of the team. Especially because, guys, Guillermo's going to be so angry about it. He's going to be so mad. You guys, Guillermo this episode. So let's just talk about him. He is still really hurt by the fact that he wasn't turned on his 10 years like he expected to be. He goes to the club with them and winds up getting... He's looking for a bathroom, and he winds up in the familiar room, which is pretty much just a utility closet. And there's not a bathroom, as it turns out, because vampires don't need them. There are 2 buckets, which the vampires gave them when they threatened to unionize. And so that was their, like, concession. And this really, altogether, is starting to grate on Guillermo in a way that I'm just watching going, oh man, I really would love it if he decided that this was it. The scene where he meets the other familiars is wildly uncomfortable. Like, he just walks in a way that is, for me, I would never. Because there's no, is there like a sign on the door that says familiar room? I'm going to go back and see, because I can't remember. And let's see, it says IENHYO on the one wall that says sex room. And then he's walking past one that just says, oh, it does say familiars. Okay. It does say familiars. So he walks in, like I said, it's got like the ice machines. There's this fluorescent lighting, and there's not even anywhere to sit. They're just standing around. And he gets, introduced to this guy, Colby, familiar of Xanthos the Cruel and Rodenka the Brutal, who, as it turns out, are children, and he pretends to be their dad. And the 2 of them speak in concert with one another. It's always like a simultaneous, and it's really, really creepy. And there's an interesting thing because Colby is like not unfriendly. It's just that Colby... Oh, I forgot about Sam. How could I forget Sam, who is a cat, but still a familiar. But Colby is just sort of mystified at the fact that Guillermo has no idea about being a familiar in so many of the ways that they have all take for granted. There's apparently a newsletter that he wasn't aware of. And he says something about like how he's been he says first Nandor the Relentless, and Colby says Nandor the Relentless of the Upper West Side, and he says no, that's Nancy the Relentless. We're Staten Island. And Colby sort of backs off and looks way less impressed right away. There's clearly a hierarchy happening. And then later on, when he says that he's been a familiar for 10 years, it's obvious that the fact that he hasn't been changed over and it's been 10 years is something that they think is a little bit embarrassing. This I found to be a really great little segment. I'm fascinated by this. I would love to see the other familiars in that room and who they are working with and what the relationship is between them and that person, that vampire. Because I want to know what the average time span is. Like, Guillermo's situation, I sort of assumed if we met other familiars, it was going to be a very sort of like surface thing. Not that this isn't surface, it is, but it's dealing with the details of it in a way I didn't expect. And I sort of thought most of them were going to be assuming they'd be turned at like any day now, but that all of the vampires were going to be on the same page where it's like, no, we don't have really any intention to turn you. We're just using you as a servant. And then probably one day you're going to die. Like either we'll lose control and kill you ourselves. You'll be killed by somebody else that's like friends with us or that we know. And it'll be very tragic, but you'll die. And the way that this is approached and Colby's attitude makes me think that Guillermo's situation is actually somewhat unusual. I thought it was going to feel a lot more common than it is. And I don't know if like Colby's attitude, if I'm misinterpreting it, I might be. But I would love to see like what the average time span of services for a given familiar before they're turned. How many of them are turned? What's like the percentage rate on that? Give me some statistics here, you know? And I'm just, you know, are all of them hoping to be turned eventually? Or are some of them perfectly content to simply be like servants, blood slaves, maybe, depending on how that works? But regardless, it's just really awkward. Guillermo is here, like, doing his best, but it just feels so unnatural in the moment. It just doesn't seem like... And part of that, I think, is that he is such a goof. All the other people in that room have a sort of, like, cool edge to them that makes them seem like they add status to whomever it is that they're working for. And Guillermo's awkwardness is, I think, meant to sort of reflect the overall embarrassing status of the Staten Island crew. I think that, it's just a status thing. And I feel really bad for him because I don't think that he was aware of this sort of thing either. I think that us watching it we are experiencing and learning about this sort of hierarchy at the same time that Guillermo is, and he's realizing the situation that he's in and how it looks even to other familiars, because it's one thing to be in a situation that you're obviously being like taken for granted and not being taken seriously, but you can tell yourself, this is a really weird, complicated situation, and other people don't really understand. And it's just, you don't maybe know anybody else who has gone through this. So in your opinion, the asking others to weigh in and see, like, do you think that he should have treated me this way? There's no point to it because nobody has the perspective of this situation. And so you can lie to yourself and keep making it like this was okay. This wasn't a big deal. I'm getting mad over nothing. But once you run into other people who are in like the exact situation you are, and you begin to see that they wouldn't accept how you're being treated for themselves, like that changes everything about how you see it. And it can make it suddenly a lot more awkward and impossible to avoid. And that, for me, is what I'm here for. I want to see Guillermo really putting his foot down. And that's what this episode is about up until it's not. He starts to. And that's sort of the theme, is that he keeps trying to, like, really draw some boundaries and trying to make it clear how he feels. And then he gets suckered in. It's really just like an abusive relationship with a boyfriend who just treats you badly and just doesn't actually respect you. And you keep getting tricked into thinking that he does really. He just messed up this one time. He just didn't know how to show it this one time. But really, he does. And if you guys just knew him better, if you really just like saw him the way that he is with me, you don't like see that side of him. But I see it. And it's just, I know that it looks like this from the outside, but it's not really like that. That's what it is. So he goes back out into the club after this like encounter and runs into this dude who is threatening to eat him, is being pretty aggressive about it. And he gets very upset at the way that Nandor does not defend him. So this dude is right in his face and looks like a goblin. He's a lot freakier looking than most of the vampires that we have seen. And this dude turns to Nandor and says, "Something I can help you with, friend?" Not really, but, were you gonna, 'cause I was thinking, pointing to Guillermo. And Nandor just says, "I would prefer it if you didn't. He's kind of my familiar. You don't have to apologize. If you really had your heart set on it, don't let me get in the way." Oh, yeah, this is really awful. And Guillermo keeps glaring at the camera in this way that is just like, he cannot fucking believe it. And he actually says to Nandor, "Wow," before he stalks off, which is, I think, the most blatant expression of his displeasure that we have seen from him to Nandor. Every other time he's been upset, he has kept it to himself and he shared it with the audience, but not with Nandor. So, and you guys know how I feel like this is, for me, a really major thing. If you are in a relationship with somebody, and that's what we're going to be calling this because it is a type of relationship, and that person does not go to bat for you whenever they get the chance, that person is not worth your time. That's not to say that you should be with somebody who won't tell you when you're wrong, but that's the point of having a partner, is for them to be a partner. And if they are not constantly attempting to support you in any way they can, then what in the fuck is the point of being with them? Honest question. This was a major factor in me realizing that I was not happy with Brendan. I was attacked by a listener on Twitter, and he watched it happen and read the entire thread, and it didn't even occur to him to say anything or step in until I literally said, "Are you planning on saying anything to this person?" Because I had been going back and forth with them all day and was clearly really upset by it because I was new to podcasting, and this person had been probably our number one fan, constantly sharing about the show, donated money, was always there in the comments. And then they suddenly did this 180 and began to be vicious towards me. So it really rattled me. And he could see that. And yet it never entered his mind to stick up for me at all. Of course, because the person who was attacking me was male, when Brendan did step in, saying the exact same shit that I had already said in my defense, the person had not accepted what I said. But when Brendan said it, all of a sudden they apologized and backed off immediately, because that's how that shit always goes. But I had to ask, I had to request that he stand up for his wife, who was suffering abuse at the hands of a stranger on the internet. And he just did not seem to care. For me, that's pretty much a wrap. You're not on my side with something that easy. I'm just not even going to trust that you will be there and have my back on anything that's going to be remotely difficult in the future. Why would I? So for me, this moment resonated hard. And Guillermo's disgust really felt earned. I get it. And I mean, the dismissive way that Nandor constantly acts towards Guillermo, it's the kind of thing that it is funny, but it also, you have to accept that Guillermo has his own amount of intelligence. And yet, how could he constantly be spoken to this way and not see, plain as day, that Nandor doesn't respect him and that Guillermo isn't really much of a priority for him? So I appreciate that they are having Guillermo sort of reach a breaking point with this where it turns out he is aware of it and he bites his tongue most of the time, but it's not like it just rolls off him, you know? So eventually Nandor tracks Guillermo down. And I love are you still upset about the thing from earlier? And Guillermo just says yes. And Nandor says, don't deny it. I can tell. And again, Guillermo's like, I just said yes. And he's like, see, I knew it. Oh, that's a pretty good exchange, honestly. I found that really funny. And he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it up to you. And he puts his hand out. And Guillermo takes his hand, and there's sort of like almost a fake out moment where, you know, I was like, are they trying to trick us into thinking that he's turning Guillermo right now? Because we know that's not happening. And instead, Nandor takes Guillermo flying. And unfortunately, doesn't keep a great grip on him. So Guillermo plummets and winds up in traction. And it's a pretty bad situation. I felt really bad for him, honestly. Guys, I have to tell you about something that I read today. So first of all, one would think being dropped from that height would mean that you would be dead. I have learned earlier today, as it happens, and this just is a stroke of weird coincidence that I was reading about this, that isn't necessarily true. Depending on where you land and how you land, you can survive a fall from a height that I would never have expected. And this thing that I read about today, and I wish I could remember her name because it would be a way for you to go and verify this, but I promise I looked into it and I found multiple articles and it is true. This woman, she went skydiving. And she got tangled in her parachute. She hurtled through the air and the tangle, like the parachute was partially out, which did catch some of the fall and slowed her down. So instead of reaching terminal velocity, which I think is something like 120, 130 miles an hour, she was only going 80 miles an hour by the time she hit the ground. However, she landed in a fire ant mound. Now, I never had experience with fire ants until I moved here to Texas. I don't know if any of y'all have, but I have lived here now almost 8 years, and I can say, with no sense of irony, the food here is not great. The people suck. The legislation is backward. Everything about Texas, to me, blows. But the worst part is the fire ants. I hate them so much, with so much of my being. I hate them. If you haven't experienced a bite from one, let me explain, because it's not just, oh, it hurts. It does, but it's so much more annoying than that. First of all, half the time, you don't even see that there are ants because they're so tiny. So this all just like hits before you even recognize that it's hit. But they bite, and then it itches. It itches like you wouldn't believe. And then the next day you wake up and every bite has turned into a disgusting whitehead that is hard as a rock and the size of a dime. Every single one. So I've been bitten on my feet multiple places, and you literally look diseased. Like, it's just horrifying. And you can either pop them, which I always do, even though they say that's not a good idea, or you can leave them. Either way, they continue to itch, and it's the worst thing. And try wearing shoes. If you've got fire ant bites because you were wearing sandals, and then you try and put shoes and socks on, Okay, yeah. You just gotta like soak them in cortisone in order to get them to stop itching. It's the worst thing in the world. And every single year I am like, this is the year I'm not getting bit. And I already got bit this year. I already got bit. Already happened. Didn't even know it had happened until I woke up with the friggin' thing. So mad. So anyway, this woman, she landed in a mound of fire ants. And while I understand our instinct is to say, well, that's just so unfair. She's already fallen from the sky at 80 miles an hour. I really feel like she's done. She doesn't need any more bad things. How dare. Get this. It turns out that the 200 bites she suffered actually injected so much fire ant poison into her system that her body responded with a surge of adrenaline that kept her heart beating. So they saved her life. If this woman hadn't landed there, she would have died. But the landing, causing those bites, basically kept her alive. Which is wild to me. What? Who knew? Like I said, I really thought that there was like a certain point at which you jump from this height and you're dead and that's just it. But evidently it's a lot more complicated than that. And I read the interview with her and she said that like, I think her femur was broken and because of the rate of the hit, the bone was sticking out and had lodged 9 centimeters into the dirt. That was how hard she was going and how it broke. Really brutal. So anyway, Guillermo, just be glad that you didn't land on a mound of fire ants because, buddy, I know you really want to get bitten, but not like that. So anyway, that's the whole thing that's going on with Guillermo. I really I don't know what I want from the Guillermo storyline. It's the sort of thing that I feel watching him get belittled over and over and not get turned like he desperately wants. I feel like that's going to get old. It hasn't yet, I'm not saying that, but I feel like it will. At the same time, I don't really know what else to ask for. I don't really want him turned because I feel like him as a vampire would just be so strange. I really don't. Maybe that would be funny. Maybe that would work. And otherwise, what? He just dies or quits or what? Like, what else is the option? If he doesn't get what he wants, does he just keep working with them until he dies, hoping and hoping? Probably. And then, like I said, once he sees that Jenna is turned, I mean, he's going to lose his mind. He's going to be so mad. So, yeah, that's going to be rough. I was thinking that she would come to Nadja for advice, and she probably will. But I wonder if Guillermo will want to help her, or if he'll just be so, bitter about it that he won't. I really don't know what to expect of him in reaction to this. I know that he's going to be disgusted, but whether he takes that out on her, I'm not so sure about. So, okay, now let's double back, and let's talk about fucking Lazlo's hat. Lazlo's hat, made from the skin of a witch, with apparently a witch's asshole on the inside of it that still moves. Also, the bearer of a great curse. So, Lazlo insists on wearing this to Simon's nightclub. And, again, it's Simon, right? Who is played by Nick Kroll. And evidently, Nadja had been kind of involved with him. Not officially, but there was clearly a flirtation and an attraction there, whether or not they actually hooked up officially. And he really makes it a point to drive home when he runs into Lazlo later that Nadja's attitude toward him physically, her behavior, did not indicate in any way that she was with somebody. He really, really wants Lazlo to know that. His nightclub, they come prepared for the nightclub that had been 100 years ago. And they all wear capes and all this stuff that is obviously no longer de rigueur, but they don't realize that. And Lazlo wears this hat purely because it's a hat that Simon wanted. And he knows, like, he's a little bit jealous of Nadja's attitude with Simon. So he kind of wants to rub it in his face that he still has this thing. So the reason they're going to this nightclub at all, by the way, is because their dominion does not stretch further than the two houses on either side of them. They have no territory. So they come in hoping that they can strike some sort of deal with Simon. Problem being, they have absolutely nothing to offer, and they're way too honest about what kind of, like, leverage they have to work with. I really thought they would pretend to him that they had all of Staten Island. They do not do that. They tell him very honestly that they only have their 2 streets. And honest, that's not even really honest. They only have like 5 houses. They tell him 2 streets because that sounds slightly better, but really, not really. And I love the variety of, like, little physical jokes throughout this episode, these gags. So first, when they arrive, Nandor is talking to this woman. He gets, like, fucking Colin comes with them. And he is, of course, sucking the joy out of every moment because that is what he does. And he cock blocks Nandor really hard. It's sort of funny, actually, because this woman is asking him if he's involved with any other vampires. And he says, no, I'm not. And is, like, you know, obviously interested in going up to the roof with her. I will be honest, there is something about Nandor that feels sexless to me on this show. So I don't know why I expected him to not be interested, but I did. I was surprised that he was like, oh no, yeah, let's go. I think it's just, he's never talked about women or men. There's not been any indicator of him, like, having an attachment or attraction to anybody. So because it just hasn't come up, I have sort of assumed it's not really an interest to him, you know, like, and I could see that happening. If you've been alive for such a long time, I could definitely see eventually getting to a point where you're just like, yeah, sex, whatever. It's all the same. I'm bored of it. I could sort of see, like, turning a corner on that and just deciding it's not really, like, that compelling any longer. That said, the whole thing with vampires is that they're supposed to be, like, really sexual, but that tends to be in relationship to victims. Like, they are seductive because they're trying to get you alone so that they can suck your blood and feed on you. And this woman is a fellow vampire. The only time that I've really seen that portrayed is in something like True Blood, where it's 2 vampires both feeding on a victim at the same time. And that is sort of like the attraction, is the both of them getting worked up by the blood frenzy, you know? So anyway, I was just genuinely surprised. A part of me had expected that if Nandor was going to be sexually interested in anyone, it would be guys. I just got a gay vibe from him. But, you know, what do I know? So, of course, Colin comes up and completely cock blocks him. And when he turns back to, like, tell him, can you just let me talk to her? He's like, who are you even talking to? And when he turns back around, she's gone. He turns around again to yell at him, and Colin's also gone. And he's just left alone and frustrated and angry. Nadja she has gone off on her own to find Simon. And they arrive, her and Lazlo arrive later because Laszlo's fucking hat is cursed and he won't admit it. So everything goes wrong. The instant that he puts this hat on, a bookshelf topples over and kills their new familiar. So that happens right off the bat, which was honestly really funny. I love the expression that Lazlo gets when he realizes, and he just like looks at the bookshelf and says, "Adieu." And I was like, I really hate that one line was that funny, but it really was. And then once they get to the city, they get stuck in traffic. There's like people like yelling at them through the window while they're stuck. All these things are going wrong. Nadja's blaming it all on the hat. Lazlo's having none of it. And then he gets out of the car and he closes the car as a taxi, and his cape is caught in the door, and the taxi takes off and drags him down the street. And it's so good because Nadja's just standing there staring at the camera with this like, I fucking told him expression on her face, while Lazlo gets dragged half a block by his cape. It was very excellent. I loved the whole framing of it in the shot. I loved the sound effects of it. I love Lazlo insisting that it's no big deal. And when they get inside, she goes and seeks out Simon right away. And Simon is like, you hear stories about all these vampires. They slowly spiral out and then get stuck in this real complacency. And eventually they just fade away. So I'm glad to see that you're doing okay. Not you, because I worry about you. And he asks about Lazlo and Nandor and how they're doing, and makes it seem as if they're all on great terms and he's excited to see them. And as it turns out, he's just kind of full of shit. Which is great because he's like called Simon the Devious. And yet they're all very surprised at the whole turn that this takes. Oh, and I should mention, I forgot to say this before, but at first when Guillermo is approached by that other vampire, I thought that he was being offered to be turned and that he might take it and get turned by a different vampire, and then maybe Nandor would be like super offended. But it turns out that this guy is just like, no, I'll just kill you. Are you cool with that? Because clearly if you're hanging out here, you just want to die, right? Is that what you're after? But anyway, so, this moment when Nadja is with Simon, though, they are approached. There's like, first of all, he's shooting fire arrows, which is a trick that they're doing back and forth to like catch the arrows, which I really love the idea of this kind of thing being what vampires do in their spare time. Instead of playing like weird baseball, they do shit that's way more dangerous, but a lot more fun to watch also. And as she's talking with him, these servers, who are wearing ruffled front shirts, by the way, roll up with a body, and I really thought this guy was dead until I looked closer and I saw that he's like holding his head up and looking over at Simon. But he is laying on ice. So I was a little bit confused by that, because I would think if you want to drain a body, you want their blood warm, right? Like if you're a vampire, that's part of the enjoyment. So why would you put them on ice unless they were dead and you were trying to keep them fresh? But this guy isn't dead. So the fact that he's on ice, I just found a little bit puzzling. He's also fully naked, and they have like the little pixelation over his junk. And there is a sparkler stuck in each corner of this trolley that is lit. It's amazing. And when they roll up, Simon just says, I wanted this 5 minutes ago. Now I'm talking to Nadja. Get out of here. And I just thought that was such a great moment. It really demonstrated who this is the standard to which he is living, and how easily he can turn down something like this, which would be a huge event, for the rest of them. And he calls them all up eventually to see him with his posse. And we get this intro of all of his people. Guys, I've got to read them, okay? Here's his crew. The Leatherskins. That's Big Vlad behind you, Abaddon, and Pusa. We've got the Freak Sisters over here. They're two sisters, and they are not related. That's Little Vlad. That guy's a fucking maniac. We got Mr. 50s. We got S, and that's because her name is Sarah. We've got Evil Steve. Freakfest Tony. Ah, there he is. Blagvad the Exsanguinator. Of course, the silent one. And we keep going over there. We've got Asian Mike, and that's Chut. Jane the Soulless. Elgrad the Fifth. Horvok the Pitmaster. Gonthrapal and his brother Krillsack. Wesley Sykes. Desdemona the Shrieker. And this bitch opens her mouth. She's got pointed teeth, like all of her teeth. And she opens her mouth just a teeny tiny bit further than should be humanly possible. And it's really unnerving, you guys. And she shrieks. That's Len, my accountant. And of course, Ken Rapula. And it's this little dude who is rapping everything badly. He just started rapping in 1991. Guys, I want a fan fiction about this crew, and I want it now. I want to know everything about what they do all day. I want to know their origin stories. I want just like maybe like a heist movie, something about them trying to just live their lives as vampires, not doing anything like necessarily super exciting. So I take back what I said about the heist. Unless it was just a heist like they're trying to steal something from the neighbors or something like that. But these are names that feel like they could really have some weight behind them story-wise. And I'm interested. That's all I'm saying. So they, of course, introduce their tiny crew, which is very, very sad. And they present their suggestion. I would bring Manhattan, and you would bring R Street and Ashley Street. Well, that sounds very interesting. So I guess I would begin negotiations by you giving me that hat. And I love Lazlo. I knew this would happen. Fucking Lazlo. So it turns out that Simon doesn't realize the hat's cursed, or else doesn't really believe. Like maybe he's like Lazlo. And Lazlo tries to say, if you want it, you have to cut my head off. But the thing is, they can, because there's a whole lot of them. So he makes this like declaration, and then very quickly looks around and realizes like, oh, you guys could definitely do that actually. So he takes the hat off and he gives it to Simon, and immediately Simon is like, okay, good. So all of you leave. And they thought this was like the start of a negotiation. They did not understand he has no interest. And he yells, you can get the fuck out. Get out of my club. And his voice gets bonkers here. Deeply rageful. I summoned you to get your hat, and now it is time for you to leave. So his friend begins beatboxing. Hey, yo, it's time to go. Hit the exit. My rhyme flow's so sick, it's on some next shit. Oh, no good, no good. So they take off, and as they're leaving, Simon is like, I'm going to celebrate this victory. And he has the fire arrow again, like all prepped and ready to go. Or no, is it the fire arrow? No, it's a torch. And he reaches the torch up, and as they're leaving, there's a sudden explosion behind them. And obviously the curse of the hat took out the nightclub. It's unclear whether Simon survived. I don't know if any of them did, if it's meant to be like the whole place burnt down or what. But whatever the case, I just love this moment when they see the explosion. All of them turn into bats and fucking book. But Colin, because he is an emotional vampire, is left behind. it's like a bit of a difference on what normally happens with Guillermo, where he's left behind. And I rather liked it because it didn't really occur to me how Colin would be on the outside with moments like that. Like, he's on the outside all the time anyway because he's a different type of vampire, but that was just a very literal, like, being left out kind of moment. So the episode ends with Guillermo in the hospital, and I can't remember where is it? There's this moment where Lazlo finds the hat, and I'm trying to see who it is in the room. They are wrapped in gauze, and I don't know if that is supposed to be Simon that's like survived this somehow, but I don't know why he would be in the hospital, because he's dead and they would notice, I would assume. So who is that? But Lazlo gets the hat back. It doesn't seem to question who's in that room. And every time he puts it on, Guillermo immediately flatlines. And he finally sort of is like, well, maybe, but still can't really accept that there's a curse. And that's the end of the episode. So who's wrapped in bandages in that room? Because I want it to have been Simon, because he's just kind of a delightful character. I am very curious what that would lead to, though. And the destruction of his club would change things. Depending on how much of his crew survives, that changes things too. But yeah, I really do enjoy this like silly little politics that's going on here. It's very my jam. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again very much to Ashley for commissioning this. I really appreciate you keeping this one going because I'm enjoying the show a lot. Hope you guys have all been enjoying the coverage, and I will not see you again for 2 weeks with a new episode, but it will be June 1st with episode 5, Animal Control. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.